Hey guys, tonight we're re-heading back to ancient China to look at how one of the world's most famous structures was built, the Great Wall. Long before it became one long line, different Chinese states built their own walls along the northern border. These early walls followed the natural shape of the land hills, valleys, and dry plains, and were made from tightly packed earth. They marked the edge where farming villages ended and the open steppe began. After China was unified in the 3rd century before the Common Era, these separate walls were connected and expanded. Later dynasties rebuilt and added to them again and again. Some parts used earth, others used stone or brick, depending on what the region offered. Watchtowers stood at regular distances, and strong gates controlled important roads. Over many centuries, the wall changed in size, shape, and material. It grew as different rulers tried to protect their borders, support trade routes, and manage life along the frontier. The Great Wall we see today is the result of all those layers of work, built slowly across a very long stretch of time. The story of the Great Wall begins with the land stretching across northern China. A landscape so large and so varied that it shaped every decision about where walls stood, how they were built, and why different dynasties returned to this project again and again. To understand the wall, it is necessary to understand the ground beneath it. The northern frontier is not one type of terrain, but a long chain of different environments. In the east, the land rises gently into hills where rivers cut narrow valleys. These areas supported some of the earliest farming communities, and the soil here could sustain villages for generations. As one moves west, the hills flatten into broad plains, where the wind has more space and the horizon stretches far into the distance. Beyond these plains, the land becomes drier, the soil turns sandy, vegetation becomes sparse, and rainfall grows increasingly unreliable. Eventually, this terrain blends into the edges of the Gobi Desert, where shifts of temperature and strong winds are common features of daily life. These northern regions have always been zones of movement, not isolation, for thousands of years. Settled agricultural communities in northern China lived alongside nomadic groups from the steppe. The contrast between these ways of life shaped frontier history. Farmers relied on fixed fields, stored food, and stable villages. Nomadic groups depended on herds that required wide open land and seasonal movement. The frontier was not a strict line, but a wide band where these worlds met. Goods, ideas, conflicts, and alliances passed through these borderlands regularly. Movement followed terrain. Certain features of the landscape acted like natural guides. A mountain pass could direct travel through an otherwise difficult region. A river valley offered a predictable path where water could be found. Open plains allowed fast travel on horseback, but required careful planning because they lacked natural shelter from storms or extreme temperatures. These patterns shaped how armies moved and how early Chinese states thought about defense. When the earliest defensive walls were built during the Warring States period, they did not try to cover every kilometer of the frontier. Instead, each state built where movement was easiest and where the terrain left them most exposed. These early walls followed the natural curves of ridges and slopes, bending with the land rather than forming straight lines. Builders understood that by placing walls at high points or narrow crossings, they could slow enemy movements and guide them toward more easily defended areas. The materials used in construction also came directly from the land. Much of northern China does not have large forests, especially the dry regions closer to the desert. Without an abundant supply of timber, builders relied on soil, a resource always available in large quantities. Rammed earth became a standard technique. Workers built wooden frames, filled them with layers of soil, and then compacted the soil repeatedly until it became hard and durable. In the dry climate of the northern frontier, this method produced strong walls that resisted weathering. This would not have worked as well in wetter regions, but here, the environment helped protect the structure. In mountain regions, stone was used more often. Loose stones and rocky slopes provided natural building material, and stone walls held their form even in areas exposed to strong winds. Along the western frontier, gravel and pebbles were sometimes compacted into layered walls. Each section of the frontier produced a wall that looked slightly different, because each region offered different conditions. Geography also determined where people settled. Villages formed near water sources or on protected slopes where the wind was less harsh. Military forts were placed on ridgelines or hilltops, where visibility extended far across the plains. Watchtowers were built in locations where they could observe movement and signal quickly to the next tower. This network, shaped by the land, formed the backbone of frontier defense long before a single unified Great Wall existed. Climate played a major role as well. Northern China experiences cold winters and hot summers. Temperature changes can be abrupt, especially in the desert margins. Workers building the walls had to plan around these conditions. Construction was easier in the warmer months, when soil could be compacted more efficiently and travel was safer. In winter, severe cold limited both movement and labor. These seasonal patterns influenced every dynasty's building schedule. As new dynasties rose and territories expanded, the frontier shifted. Sometimes it moved northward, sometimes southward, depending on political and military strength. But while the political border could change, the natural geography remained constant. Mountains, rivers, and plains continued to shape where new walls were added or old ones repaired. Supply systems depended heavily on geography. Transporting building materials across long distances was costly and slow, especially without advanced road networks. This meant that most materials had to come from nearby. Soil was used where soil was abundant. Stone was used where stone was available. Brick became common much later, under the Ming dynasty, when the state organized large-scale production near major construction zones. Even then, bricks could not be carried far across desert regions, so stone and rammed earth remained necessary in those areas. The frontier was not only a defensive zone but also an active region of daily work. Soldiers patrolled the watchtowers, farmers planted crops in the nearby fields, traders passed through fortified gates carrying goods toward the interior. Officials maintained records of movement and supply. All of this activity took place within a landscape that constantly influenced the rhythm of life. Wide plains allowed early detection of approaching groups. Narrow passos required heavier fortification. Dry climates allowed rammed earth walls to last for centuries. The environment shaped the needs of the builders and the responsibilities of those who defended the frontier. When looking at the history of the Great Wall, it might seem like a single project, but the geography of northern China shows why it was in fact many projects spread across time. Each dynasty responded to the same landscape, facing similar challenges. The need for stable borders, reliable supply routes, and controlled movement. The land guided where walls could stand and how they should be maintained. Understanding this geography offers a clearer picture of why the Great Wall developed as it did. It was not simply a defensive line drawn on a map. It was a structure built into the land itself, shaped by mountains, plains, deserts, and centuries of life. Along the frontier, before the Great Wall existed as one long structure, northern China was divided among several competing states. This period, known as the Warring States era, lasted from the 5th to the 3rd century, before the Common Era. It was a time of rapid change, rising populations, and constant military pressure. Each state formed its own strategies for survival, and building defensive walls along vulnerable borders became one of the most practical solutions. By this time, agriculture had expanded across the plains and river valleys of northern China. Settlements grew larger, and governments became more organized, but these regions were also close to the open steppe, where mobile groups such as the Xiongnu operated. These groups moved swiftly across large distances on horseback. They could appear, raid, and disappear before defenders had time to respond. States along the frontier needed ways to slow this movement and protect their farmland, villages, and supply routes. As a result, several states began building long earth walls to mark and defend their borders. These were not symbolic boundaries. They were practical military tools. The most active wall-building states were Qin, Zhao, and Yan, all positioned along the northern frontier and therefore highly exposed. Each one faced similar pressures and responded with similar engineering choices. The materials used for these early walls came from the land itself. Workers built rammed earth structures by constructing wooden frames and filling them with layers of soil. The soil was compacted repeatedly using heavy tools until it became dense and strong. When Fini said these walls were surprisingly durable, especially in dry climates. Many fragments of these early walls still survive today, showing that their builders understood how to create long-lasting structures, even with simple tools. These early walls did not aim to be continuous barriers stretching across the entire frontier. Instead, they targeted specific routes. For example, the state of Zhou built walls to defend its northern regions, focusing on the easiest paths through the mountains and plains. The state of Yan, located farther east, built walls to protect key passes near the Liao River basin. The state of Qin, which later unified China, constructed walls along its vulnerable northern edges long before it attempted to connect anything on a larger scale. Each wall responded directly to the geography. Builders placed walls on ridgelines where visibility was greatest. The goal was not to create an unbroken line, but to force incoming groups into predictable paths where defenders could respond more effectively. Labor for these projects came from several sources. States organized large groups of workers through corvée labor, a system in which households were required to provide manpower for public works. Soldiers also participated, especially in areas where the worksite was close to the frontier and required protection. These workers lived in temporary camps, used simple tools, and often faced harsh weather. Despite these challenges, progress was steady because the work was repetitive and the materials were always available. The function of these early walls went beyond military defense. Archaeological discoveries provide a clearer picture of how these early walls operated. Excavations have revealed foundation layers of rammed earth, pottery shards from worker camps, and remains of beacon platforms used for signaling. These findings show that the walls were not isolated structures, but part of larger defensive networks. Watchtowers allowed messages to travel quickly, often using smoke by day and fire by night. From tower to tower, signals could cover long distances in a short time, giving defenders early warning when movement was detected along the frontier. Even though each state built its own walls, none of them intended these structures to be permanent solutions. The walls were designed to meet immediate needs during a period of intense conflict. When political power shifted or military threats changed, walls were repaired, expanded, or abandoned. Some sections became irrelevant as borders moved. Others became foundations for later construction. Despite their temporary intentions, the impact of these early walls was significant. They introduced the concept of large-scale frontier defense, which later dynasties expanded. They also demonstrated the usefulness of rammed earth construction, a technique that remains central to Great Wall building for centuries. Most importantly, these walls created the idea of a defended northern boundary, a concept that continued to evolve long after the Warring States era ended. When the Qin dynasty eventually unified China in 221 BCE, the new rulers inherited not one wall but many separate ones. These scattered structures formed the basis for the next major phase of wall building. The Qin government decided to connect, extend, and reorganize the existing walls into a more unified defensive system. Without the work done by the Warring States, such a project would have been far more difficult. These early walls also reveal how closely military strategy depended on the land itself. The states did not build walls randomly. They studied the terrain, identified weak points, and used the landscape as part of the defense. This approach continued throughout Chinese history. Later, walls followed the same logic. Use mountains, ridges, and natural barriers whenever possible, and reinforce open plains where defenses were most needed. When the Qin dynasty unified China in 221 before the Common Era, it inherited a landscape already marked by long defensive lines. These separate structures, created by different states for their own needs, now formed a starting point for a larger, more coordinated project. The next phase of wall building would draw directly from these foundations and extend them across an even wider frontier. When the Qin dynasty unified China in 221 before the Common Era, it inherited a map filled with separate defensive systems. The former warring states had each built their own stretches of wall across the northern frontier, shaped by their individual needs and the land around them. Now, for the first time, one central authority governed all these territories. With unification came the challenge of securing the new empire's long and exposed northern border. The Qin government saw the frontier differently from the smaller states that came before. Instead of protecting only a single region, It needed to stabilize movement across an enormous territory. The northern steppe remained home to powerful mobile groups, and fast-moving cavalry posed the same challenges as before. But now, these threats affected the security of the entire empire, not just one local area. The Qin rulers responded by launching an organized project to link, rebuild, and expand the earlier walls into a more continuous system. To begin this work, officials surveyed the existing network. They examined the walls built by Zhao, Yan, and Qin itself, identifying which sections could be connected and which needed new construction. The goal was not to create a perfectly straight line, but to create a defensible chain. As in previous generations, geography guided the direction. The new system followed ridges, where visibility was high, curved around mountains, where travel was difficult, and crossed open plains where speed made defense essential. This meant the wall did not follow a single path, but instead moved with the terrain. The construction process remained simple in technique, but large in scale. Rammed earth continued to be the main building material. Workers set up wooden molds to hold the soil, poured earth inside, and compacted it, layer by layer. This repetitive process created a wall that was dense and strong. In many places, the Qin used soil mixed with gravel or sand to increase durability. These materials were available everywhere along the frontier, which made it possible to build quickly across long distances. Labor was a central part of the Qin project. The new government had a strict system of mobilizing workers through corvée labor, requiring households to supply men for state projects each year. Large groups of conscripted peasants, soldiers, and convicts were organized into teams. Some built the walls directly, while others transported soil, built camps, or maintained supply routes. Construction took place mostly in the warmer months, when the soil was easier to compact and roads were more reliable for moving materials. In remote regions, workers lived in temporary shelters and sometimes built small storage pits to protect tools and food from the weather. The Qin dynasty was known for its centralization and its ability to direct large numbers of people toward massive public works. During the same period, it built roads, canals, and the famous mausoleum of the first emperor. The wall-building project fit into this pattern. Officials recorded labor quotas, planned routes, and sent regular reports to higher authorities. This level of organization allowed the government to extend the walls farther and faster than individual states had ever managed before. The purpose of the newly unified wall system was not only defensive, it also helped the Qin government establish administrative control across the frontier. Guards monitored movement, regulated trade, and enforced policies on migration and border crossings. Beacon towers were placed at intervals to send signals along the line. These towers allowed communication across long distances. With smoke signals by day and fire signals at night, information could travel quickly from one region to another. This created a more connected frontier where commanders could respond to developments in real time. Archaeological evidence supports this picture of the Qin project. Surviving sections of rammed earth walls show layers of packed soil that remain visible even after more than 2,000 years. Some stretches preserve impressions of wooden planks used as molds. Excavations have uncovered remains of worker camps, including charcoal pits, animal bones, and fragments of tools. These details confirm that construction was continuous and organized, often taking place in harsh and remote environments where workers left behind traces of their daily life. The Qin wall network extended far to the west, reaching towards the Gansu corridor. This region served as a crucial gateway between central China and the areas beyond the Yellow River Basin. By defending this corridor, the Qin government could protect settlement zones and maintain communication routes across the empire's northern edge. In the east, the wall helped secure regions near the Liao River and prevented fast-moving groups from entering cultivated farmland. The scale of the Qin project left a deep mark on the frontier, but it was not intended to be the final version of the wall. The dynasty's rule was short, lasting only 15 years. After its collapse, the Han dynasty inherited the wall system and continued to expand it. But the Qin's basic approach, connecting earlier structures, extending them across strategic points, and using rammed earth on a massive scale, set a pattern that later dynasties continued to follow. The Qin walls also shaped how future governments understood the frontier. By creating a long defensive line, the Qin turned the idea of a northern boundary into something physical and permanent. Even as political borders shifted in later centuries, the concept of the wall remained. It became a familiar feature of frontier policy, influencing not only military planning, but also settlement, trade, and administration. While the Qin project focused largely on unifying and expanding earlier walls, it also introduced new links between regions. Roads were built to connect wall segments to supply centers and administrative hubs. These transportation routes allowed officials to move soldiers and materials more efficiently. Over time, this infrastructure helped integrate remote frontier communities into the larger imperial system. As the Qin dynasty came to an end, the wall stood as a visible record of the government's efforts to secure its borders. Although later dynasties would repair, rebuild, or replace Qin-era sections, many of the basic routes established during this period remained in use for centuries. The terrain had guided the wall's direction, and once a path had been set, future builders often followed it. In many parts of northern China, the Qin walls formed the foundation for all later construction, even when stone, brick, and more advanced techniques were introduced under the Ming dynasty. Builders returned to the same ridgelines and passes, first used in the Warring States and Qin eras. The landscape remained constant, and the logic of defense continued to follow the terrain. As the Han dynasty rose, it inherited not only a political structure, but a frontier marked by long lines of earth stretching across plains and mountains. These lines became the starting point for the next chapter in the history of the Great Wall, shaping how the empire interacted with the northern world in the centuries to come. The most common building method used in the early Great Wall was rammed earth. This technique appears simple at first glance, but it required organization, steady labor, and a clear understanding of how soil behaves under pressure. For centuries, rammed earth walls stood across northern China, shaping the frontier long before brick and stone became widespread. Understanding how this material was prepared and used helps explain why so many ancient wall sections survive for more than 2,000 years. Rammed earth begins with the soil taken directly from the land near the construction site. Workers use wooden shovels and baskets to gather earth from pits dug along the frontier. The soil was not uniform. It might contain clay, sand, gravel, or a mix of all three. Builders quickly learned that a balanced mixture produced the strongest results. Too much sand made the wall crumble. Too much clay caused it to crack. Over time, workers developed a practical sense of which soils compacted best, adjusting the mixture depending on what the land provided. Once enough material was gathered, the next step was preparing the molds. These molds, usually made of wooden planks, formed a frame that defined the shape and thickness of the wall. The molds could be several meters long and were set up on top of each completed section before the next layer was added. Workers secured the molds with wooden stakes driven into the ground. The frame had to be stable because it needed to resist repeated strikes during the ramming process. The soil was poured into the molds in thin layers. Each layer was only a few centimeters thick, which allowed workers to compress it thoroughly. Ramming tools varied across periods and regions. Some were simple wooden poles with heavy ends, lifted and dropped repeatedly. Others were double-handed devices that allowed two workers to apply force together. The goal was always the same: to remove air from the soil and press the particles tightly together. The sound of ramming echoed across the worksite. Steady, rhythmic strikes compacted the earth into a dense, cohesive mass. In many cases, workers could feel the soil become harder as they continued the process. When a layer reached the desired density, more soil was added, and the process repeated. In this way, the wall grew slowly upward, layer by layer. When a section reached its full height, the molds were removed and repositioned farther along the line. Rammed earth created surprisingly durable walls. The compacted layers formed a solid mass that resisted erosion in dry regions. Northern China's climate, with low rainfall in many frontier zones, protected these walls from heavy weathering. Even after centuries, some layers remain clearly visible in surviving wall sections. Their horizontal lines show where each batch of soil was compacted. These marks offer a direct connection to the methods of ancient builders. The technique was also efficient, since materials were taken from the surrounding land. Transport remained minimal. This allowed large numbers of workers to progress steadily across long distances. The method required coordination but not advanced tools or specialized knowledge, which made it ideal for the massive labor forces mobilized by early dynasties. The Qin and Han governments could assign thousands of workers to different sections without needing to train them extensively in complicated engineering. Despite its strengths, rammed earth construction required careful planning. Walls needed to stand on stable ground. Wet soil or loose sand could weaken the foundation. Builders often cleared vegetation, smoothed the surface, and sometimes dug shallow trenches to anchor the base. In mountainous areas, foundations were carved directly into bedrock. The stability of the ground determined how well the wall would endure over time. Thickness varied by region. Some early walls were more than 6 meters wide at the base, narrowing as they rose. This shape added strength and reduced the risk of collapse. In areas with harsher weather or more frequent movement, walls were built thicker to withstand stress. The height also varied, but many sections reached several meters, enough to slow cavalry and restrict movement. Rammed earth worked particularly well in climates where rain was limited. In wetter regions, erosion could become a serious problem, washing away unprotected layers. This is one reason why stone and brick later became common in the eastern and central parts of the Ming dynasty's wall. But across the arid and semi-arid zones of the northern frontier, rammed earth remained both practical and effective. Archaeological studies reveal additional details about the technique. Some wall sections contain small stones mixed into the layers, added intentionally to strengthen the structure. Others showed traces of tamping tools, preserved as faint impressions in the compacted soil. In certain areas, researchers have found the remains of temporary brick kilns and wooden stakes used to support the molds. These discoveries helped reconstruct the daily routines of workers who lived for months at distant work sites. The organization of labor also shaped how rammed earth walls were built. Teams were assigned to different tasks: gathering soil, preparing molds, ramming layers, transporting materials, and maintaining tools. Supervisors ensured that layers were compacted evenly. In large projects, such as those during the Qin dynasty, multiple teams worked simultaneously on different stretches of the frontier. This allowed construction to continue steadily, even as the wall extended across mountains, valleys, and deserts. Rammed earth was not only a construction method, but also part of a broader system of frontier defense. The walls built with this technique supported watchtowers, beacon platforms, and small forts. Wooden or stone structures were added on top of the earth to increase visibility and improve communication. Some sections included paths along the top, allowing soldiers to move quickly from one position to another. The strength of the compacted earth provided a reliable base for these additional features. Even though later dynasties introduced new materials, rammed earth remained important for centuries. In many remote regions, brick and stone were difficult to transport. Soil, however, was always available. As a result, new rammed earth sections continued to be added long after other parts of the Great Wall began to take on a more familiar stone or brick appearance. The endurance of these ancient walls demonstrates the effectiveness of the technique. Many stretches of rammed earth still stand clearly in today's landscape. Their surfaces show wind erosion, but the core remains solid. Layering marks remain visible, offering evidence of the effort and coordination that went into each phase of construction. As later dynasties expanded their control and extended the wall, they built upon the foundations created by these early techniques. The method shaped the character of the frontier and set patterns that influenced construction for generations. The walls of the Qin and early Han dynasties began as compacted layers of earth, and these layers became the starting point for the next stages of development along the vast northern border. The construction of the Great Wall during the Qin dynasty depended on one of the most organized labor systems in early Chinese history. The Qin state had already developed strict administrative practices long before it unified China, and these practices expanded further after 221 before the Common Era, building long defensive lines across mountains, plains, and deserts required not only materials and planning, but also tens of thousands of workers operating in a coordinated way. The Qin government used several sources of labor. The largest group came from covey service, a system in which ordinary households were required to send men to work on state projects for a set period each year. This was not optional. Officials kept detailed household registers, and each family had obligations recorded in these documents. Men might serve in the army, work on roads or canals, or be assigned to the wall-building teams along the northern frontier. In addition to corvée laborers, soldiers were often sent to construction sites. Some units were stationed near the frontier, and involvement in public works was part of their regular duties. Convicts also formed a significant portion of the workforce. Instead of serving time in prisons, which were rare and not designed for long-term confinement offenders, were often sentenced to labor on state projects. Their presence at wall sites is supported by ancient writings that mention penal labor being used for large-scale construction. The organization of work began long before laborers arrived at the frontier. Officials studied the land, identified routes for the wall, and divided the project into manageable sections. Each section had a designated leader who reported to higher authorities. Detailed instructions were sent from the central administration, outlining timetables, expected progress, and resource need. These instructions helped ensure that construction remained steady even in distant and difficult regions. When workers arrived at a construction site, the first task was establishing a temporary camp. These camps needed to support hundreds or thousands of people over long periods. Workers built simple shelters using available materials, wood, straw, or fabric. Fire pits were set up for cooking. Storage areas were dug or constructed to protect food and tools. Wells or water channels were identified nearby to supply drinking water. Archaeological remains of such camps include pottery fragments, charcoal deposits, and discarded animal bones. Food played a crucial role in maintaining the workforce. Supplies were transported from nearby settlements or from administrative centers farther south. Grain, dried vegetables, and preserved meat formed the core of the diet. Workers cooked in groups, using large clay pots or metal cauldrons. In some regions, livestock were brought to the site so that fresh meat could be prepared when needed. Stable food supplies helped keep laborers healthy enough to continue working under demanding conditions. Daily routines at the construction site followed a structured pattern. Work began early in the morning to make use of daylight. Teams were assigned different duties: gathering soil, preparing wooden molds, ramming earth, transporting materials, repairing tools, or maintaining the camp. Supervisors ensured that each team completed its tasks efficiently. Because rammed earth construction required steady progress, layer by layer, coordination between teams was essential. Clothing and equipment varied depending on the worker's role. Most laborers wore simple garments made from hemp or other coarse fabrics. These clothes offered basic protection from the sun and wind, but were not specialized for heavy construction. Workers used wooden shovels, baskets, ramming posts, and simple levers. The tools were not complex, but their effectiveness depended on group effort and repeated use, where there was a constant influence on the work. In the dry regions of northern China, daytime temperatures could become extremely hot, while nights were significantly cooler. Strong winds sometimes slowed progress, especially when workers had to gather loose soil. Rain, though less frequent in many areas, could halt construction entirely. Wet soil was difficult to compact properly, so workers waited for conditions to improve before continuing. These natural patterns shaped the building schedule, with the most intense periods of construction occurring in late spring, summer, and early autumn. Communication across work sites required clear organization. The Qin administration relied on runners, mounted messengers, and established routes to send reports between officials. Progress updates were essential, as they helped the government adjust labor quotas or supply shipments. Some messages likely traveled through the same road systems that connected frontier garrisons, making it easier to coordinate both military and construction activities. The scale of the labor effort also shaped the frontier environment. Building long walls required large quantities of soil, which meant digging pits along the route. These pits, sometimes still visible today, formed part of the landscape around the wall. Temporary paths created by workers and transport animals gradually became more permanent routes used by soldiers and travelers. Over time, these paths contributed to the development of frontier roads. Archaeological evidence provides insight into the daily experiences of workers on the Qin Wall. In some locations, remains of cooking pots, animal bones, and storage vessels show how people ate and lived while stationed far from home. In other places, fragments of wooden tools and stone-pounding devices reveal the constant physical effort involved in ramming earth. Such findings illustrate the continuous movement, repeated tasks, and shared routines that defined life at these construction sites. The labor system did not function in isolation. It connected to broader aspects of Qin governance. Household registers tracked the number of available workers in each region. Laws prescribed penalties for failing to appear for corvée duty. Local officials supervised the movement of laborers from their home villages to frontier work. These administrative structures supported large-scale projects not only along the northern border but throughout the empire. Despite the order and planning behind it, frontier labor was demanding and sometimes harsh. Workers operated in remote regions with limited shelter and extreme weather. Travel to and from the construction sites could take weeks. Many laborers spent months away from their homes, returning only after completing their required service. Their work produced a long foundation of walls that would later be expanded, rebuilt, or reinforced by subsequent dynasties. The organization of labor under the Qin dynasty created the first version of a truly connected defensive line by coordinating thousands of workers, supervising supplies, and maintaining communication across wide distances. The Qin government established a framework that shaped later wall-building practices. As the centuries progressed, this system became part of the broader history of frontier management in northern China. When the Qin dynasty ended, these workers' efforts remained visible across the landscape. The walls they built continued to mark routes, shape movement, and define the edge of the empire. Later dynasties would build upon these foundations, adding new layers to the frontier and extending its reach further across the northern world. Building and maintaining long defensive walls along the northern frontier required more than workers and materials. It required a logistical system capable of supporting thousands of people scattered across remote landscapes. These systems supplying food, water, tools, animals, and communication were essential to the survival of construction teams and later to the garrisons stationed along the wall. Without steady logistics, the Great Wall could not have developed into the extended frontier network that shaped northern China for centuries. The first need was food. Workers burned enormous amounts of energy every day as they dug soil, carried baskets, and compacted earth. Grain formed the basis of their diet because it could be stored easily and transported over long distances. Millet and wheat were common in northern China, and these grains were processed into porridge, steamed cakes, or simple flatbreads. At the construction sites, dried vegetables and preserved meats supplemented the diet, especially in cooler regions where spoilage was less of a concern. Supplies came from nearby farms when possible, but remote areas required transport caravans organized by local officials. Water was equally important. Many sections of the frontier passed through dry or semi-arid zones where natural water sources were limited. Workers needed a steady supply not only for drinking but also for cooking and for mixing soil and preparing rammed earth. Officials identified reliable wells, seasonal streams, or springs before starting construction in any area. In some places, temporary cisterns were dug to collect rainwater, where the distance between water sources was too great. Teams used animals, usually donkeys or horses, to carry water in ceramic jars or leather containers. Transporting materials required its own planning. Soil for rammed earth was available near most construction sites, but other items such as wooden planks for molds, rope, baskets, and metal tools had to be brought from settlements. Caravans moved slowly across the frontier, following paths worn by human and animal traffic. These paths, created during earlier military or trading movements, expanded over time as supplies for wall construction passed repeatedly along them. They eventually became recognizable routes that connected administrative centers to the frontier, making travel more predictable for both workers and officials. Animals played a central role in logistics. Horses allowed messengers to move quickly between construction zones. Donkeys and mules carried heavy loads over long distances. Oxen pulled carts where terrain allowed, though many frontier areas were too steep or rocky for wheeled transport. Because animals themselves required food and water, officials planned routes around areas with grazing land or arranged separate supply deliveries for fodder. Archaeological remains, such as hoof prints, bone fragments, and feeding troughs, found near certain wall sections confirm the importance of animals in maintaining the flow of materials. Temporary storage sites formed another key component of logistics. Workers built storehouses using wood, mud, or stone, depending on what materials were available. These structures held grain, tools, firewood, and other essentials. Some were simple roofed shelters. Others were small, fortified compounds placed near strategic points. Because supplies were vulnerable to weather and theft, Guards were stationed near storage areas to watch over them. Over time, these storage sites sometimes developed into permanent settlements or military posts. Communication across the frontier supported all logistical operations. Without clear and timely communication, supply shortages could disrupt construction or weaken garrison defenses. The Qin and later Han dynasties used mounted couriers who traveled along frontier roads to deliver orders and reports. These routes connected the interior administrative centers to distant wall sections. As the frontier grew more complex, signal towers using smoke during the day and fire at night helped relay urgent messages such as sightings of movement along the steppe. These signals did not replace couriers, but allowed rapid communication across long distances. Daily life at construction sites followed a rhythm shaped by logistics. Morning began with meals cooked over shared fires. Workers collected tools from storage areas and organized themselves into teams. As construction progressed, supervisors monitored the amount of soil gathered and compacted, ensuring that material supplies matched the work pace. Throughout the day, carriers moved between the wall and nearby storage sites to fetch additional baskets, ropes, or water. Messengers traveled between teams to deliver instructions or request supplies. The constant movement of people and animals created a steady flow of activity across the work zone. The frontier environment imposed challenges that logistics had to overcome. In dry regions, dust storms could limit visibility and slow transport. In mountainous areas, narrow paths made it difficult for animals to carry supplies. During rain, soil became slippery, increasing the time required to move goods. Cold weather posed its own difficulties, as water froze and food supplies required additional protection. To respond to these conditions, officials scheduled construction to avoid the harshest weather and moved supplies in larger quantities during favorable periods. Some regions along the frontier became logistical hubs. These places had access to water, stable ground, and enough space to store large amounts of grain or equipment. Hubs supported multiple construction teams at once, and sometimes included small garrisons to protect supplies. Archaeological findings from such locations include remains of large storage pits lined with clay to keep grain dry, as well as clusters of pottery vessels used for transporting water or food. These finds show how logistics shaped settlement patterns and infrastructure along the frontier. As construction moved along the wall, logistics adapted to new terrain. In forested areas, wood was gathered locally for molds and scaffolding. In rocky regions, stone was collected for foundations. In desert zones, workers planned routes around sand dunes and relied on deep wells or transported water. These adjustments required careful coordination between officials who supervised construction and those who managed supplies. The success of the wall depended on the ability of these groups to work together, despite distance and challenging conditions. Later dynasties inherited and expanded these logistical systems. The Han government, for example, improved frontier roads to support movement between garrisons. These roads later served caravans along the Silk Road, linking military needs to broader patterns of trade. The Ming dynasty developed even more extensive supply networks to support brick and stone construction and large garrisons stationed along the wall. But the basic principles, steady food, reliable water, coordinated transport, and effective communication remained constant. The logistical systems created during the early periods helped shape the frontier into a functioning zone of settlement, movement, and administration. Over time, these systems became permanent features of the northern border, supporting not only construction but also daily life for soldiers, traders, and local communities. The ability to maintain supply chains across difficult terrain allowed dynasties to extend the wall farther than any earlier state had managed. As construction continued and the frontier grew more organized, dynasties used these logistical foundations to expand their reach even further. The next stages of wall building unfolded across this ever-growing system of roads, storage hubs, and communication routes, linking distant regions of the empire more closely than before. When the Qin dynasty collapsed in 206 before the Common Era, the Han dynasty took control of a vast and diverse territory. The northern frontier, shaped by earlier walls and long stretches of open land, remained a critical zone. The Han government understood that stability along this border was essential for the empire's security, trade, and communication. As a result, the Han rulers expanded, repaired, and reorganized the defensive systems inherited from the Qin, turning them into a more extensive and interconnected network. The early Han period saw frequent contact with the Xiongnu, a powerful confederation of nomadic groups living across the steppe. These groups moved quickly on horseback and controlled wide areas of northern Asia. Their mobility created challenges for the Han government, which needed to protect agricultural settlements, garrisons, and trade routes. The existing Qin walls offered a foundation, but they were not enough. Many sections required repair after years of neglect, and new stretches needed to be built in places where the frontier had shifted or where movement remained difficult to control. One of the most significant expansions occurred in the northwest, where the Han dynasty sought to secure the Hexi corridor. This long and narrow strip of land, positioned between the Qilian Mountains and the Gobi Desert, served as a natural route linking central China to regions farther west. Controlling this corridor meant controlling access to the early Silk Road. To protect it, the Han extended the wall system westward, building fortified outposts, beacon towers, and administrative centers along the route. The Han approach to construction followed many patterns established during the Qin era. Rammed earth remained the primary building material, especially in dry regions. Workers gathered soil from nearby pits, mixed it with gravel or sand when needed, and compacted it layer by layer inside wooden molds. In some areas, the Han added reed layers within the earth to improve stability, a technique that helped reduce cracking and strengthen the structure. Traces of these red layers have been found in excavated wall sections along the Han frontier. Labor for the Han walls came from similar sources of before. Corvée workers, soldiers, and convicts formed the main labor force. The Han government refined administrative systems inherited from the Qin, keeping organized records of households and labor obligations. Officials assigned groups of workers to different segments of the wall and supervised their progress. The government also established military agricultural colonies known as Tunshan near the frontier. These colonies supported garrisons with food supplies and helped reduce the need for long transport routes. Fortifications along the Han Wall included a range of structures. Beacon towers appeared at regular intervals, allowing garrisons to send smoke signals during the day and fire signals at night. These beacons helped create a communication network across long distances, enabling quick responses to movement along the frontier. Watchtowers and small forts housed soldiers who monitored activity in surrounding areas. Some forts acted as administrative centers where officials registered travelers, collected taxes, and managed trade. The Han dynasty also developed a system of relay stations along the frontier. These stations supported couriers who carried government messages between major administrative centers. Horses were kept ready for use, allowing couriers to switch mounts and continue traveling without delay. This relay system, known as the Postal Relay Network, later supported Silk Road caravans, demonstrating how the frontier infrastructure contributed to wider patterns of trade and communication. Water management played an important role in the Han expansion. Many frontier regions were arid, and wall construction required steady access to water for drinking and mixing soil. The Han government identified reliable wells, built channels to redirect seasonal water flow, and sometimes dug artificial cisterns to store water. Archaeological remains show that some Han forts contained deep, stone-lined wells, indicating the importance of water security in these isolated environments. Conditions for workers varied depending on location. In the northwest, temperatures could drop sharply at night, even in warmer months. Windstorms were common, carrying sand across the landscape and making construction more difficult. Workers built shelters from mud, reeds, or stone to protect themselves from the elements. Food supplies came from agricultural colonies and from grain shipments delivered along frontier roads. Daily routines remained similar to those of earlier periods: gathering soil, preparing molds, ramming earth, caring for animals, and maintaining the camp. The expansion of the wall during the Han dynasty also influenced settlement patterns. Over time, small communities grew near forts and relay stations. Families of soldiers sometimes lived alongside garrisons, supporting them with farming, herding, or craft work. These settlements helped stabilize the frontier, creating a continuous zone where military, administrative, and civilian life intersected. The frontier became not only a defensive line but a region of active development. Trade was another important factor in the Han frontier system. As the Silk Road began to form, the Han walls protected key routes linking China to Central Asia. Caravans carrying silk, jade, and other goods passed through fortified gates along the corridor. Officials recorded movement, collected duties, and ensured the safety of merchants. The wall did not stop trade. Instead, it helped regulate and protect it. These economic connections strengthened the importance of the frontier and supported the dynasty's broader goals. Archaeological evidence offers a clear view of the Han dynasty's impact. Many wall sections from this period remain visible today, especially in the Gansu region. The compacted layers of earth still show the horizontal lines created during the ramming process. Beacon towers stand as tall, square structures rising from the desert floor. Ruins of forts reveal rooms arranged around central courtyards, storage pits lined with clay, and traces of wooden beams. These remains show how carefully the Han designed frontier defenses and how extensively they developed the region. As centuries passed, maintenance became an essential part of frontier life. The Han government assigned troops in local households to repair damaged sections of the wall. Seasonal weather caused erosion, and heavy winds sometimes weakened the surface layers. Regular repairs helped maintain stability and ensure that garrisons remained functional. This ongoing maintenance linked the wall closely to the people who lived nearby, making it a shared responsibility across the frontier. The Han dynasty's expansion of the northern defenses left a lasting influence on Chinese history. By extending the wall further west and strengthening its infrastructure, the Han created a frontier zone that supported both military operations and long-distance trade. The patterns established during this period combining walls, forts, beacon towers, and relay stations shaped later defensive strategies and remained part of the landscape long after the dynasty ended. As later dynasties inherited the frontier, they continued to build upon the foundations laid during the Han period. The systems of communication, supply, and settlement that developed along the wall provided a framework for future expansion, allowing the frontier to evolve in response to new challenges and changing conditions. As the wall expanded across northern China, it became clear that the structure itself was only part of the frontier system. The wall needed people to watch it, repair it, send signals, and respond to movement along the border. For this reason, garrisons and watchtowers became essential features of every dynasty's defenses. These installations formed a living network that brought order and communication to remote regions where large distances and harsh conditions shaped daily life. Watchtowers were among the most recognizable features of the frontier. Built at regular intervals, they stood on high ground or along prominent ridges where visibility was greatest. Their height allowed soldiers to observe movements across the plains or valleys. A single tower could cover a wide stretch of land, but the real strength came from placing towers close enough that each one could signal to the next. This created a chain of communication stretching across the frontier. Most watchtowers were constructed from the same materials as the wall segments around them. In arid regions, towers were built of rammed earth. Workers shaped thick, square bases and lifted the structure layer by layer, compacting soil until it formed a solid, upright block. In rocky regions, towers might be built from stone, using irregular pieces fitted together with compacted earth. In later periods, especially under the Ming dynasty, brick towers became more common. But during the Qin and Han eras, rammed earth remained the standard material. Inside a typical tower, space was limited but functional. The interior usually included small platforms or steps that allowed soldiers to climb to the top. Openings were cut into the walls to provide clear views in all directions. Some towers had sheltered spaces where soldiers could take cover from wind or prepare signal materials. While the design varied by region, the purpose remained consistent: keep watch over the land and communicate what was seen. Alongside watchtowers, garrisons formed the backbone of frontier life. Garrisons were military stations where soldiers lived, trained, and maintained control over the surrounding area. They ranged from small outposts with only a few soldiers to larger forts with dozens or even hundreds of personnel. These installations were usually located near water sources, road intersections, or important passages. Their placement reflected both strategic needs and the practical demands of daily survival. Life inside a frontier garrison followed a structured routine. Soldiers began their mornings with inspections, equipment checks, and basic training exercises. They maintained weapons, cleaned storage areas, and prepared food. Because they lived far from major cities, garrisons needed to remain so. Many had small gardens or fields nearby, tended by soldiers or by families living in military colonies. Grain shipments arrived from administrative centers, but local food sources helped reduce supply pressure. Garrisons were responsible for monitoring movement across the frontier. Patrols moved along the wall or through nearby valleys, observing any activity and reporting to watchtowers when necessary. Soldiers recorded information about travelers, caravans, and local residents. These records helped maintain order and ensured that officials had accurate knowledge of frontier conditions. Over time, this system created a detailed picture of daily life along the border, showing how people, goods, and herds moved through the region. Communication between garrisons and watchtowers relied on both physical messengers and signal systems. Messengers traveled on foot or horseback, carrying written reports or verbal messages. But the most immediate form of communication came from beacon signals. Watchtowers stored bundles of dry grass, reeds, or wood. During the day, smoke signals were used. At night, fires were lit. The sight of a rising column of smoke or a bright flame alerted nearby towers to send the signal onward. In this way, information could travel across long distances in a short time. Beacon systems could communicate simple messages such as the direction of movement or the estimated size of approaching groups. Although the signals did not convey detailed information, they allowed garrisons to prepare quickly or send scouts to gather more precise observations. The use of beacons continued throughout many dynasties, demonstrating the importance of rapid communication in frontier defense. The relationship between garrisons and local communities helped stabilize the frontier. Soldiers sometimes lived with their families, especially in agricultural colonies, where farming supported their food needs. These families provided labor and contributed to local economies. In turn, garrisons offered protection for villages and traders. Markets sometimes formed near forts, where merchants delivered goods such as grain, cloth, tools, and livestock. This exchange benefited both civilians and the military, creating a network of support along the wall. Archaeological evidence reveals the structure of many ancient garrisons. Excavated forts show thick walls forming rectangular or square compounds. Inside these compounds were rooms arranged around open courtyards. These rooms served as living quarters, storage spaces, armories, and administrative offices. Some forts included wells or water channels, confirming the importance of reliable water access. Clay-lined storage pits indicate where grain was kept. Burned layers in certain structures suggest accidental fires or repairs made after damage. Environmental conditions shaped daily challenges. Winters in northern China could be extremely cold, requiring soldiers to maintain fires and repair clothing regularly. Strong winds in the desert regions carried sand that entered buildings and caused wear on wooden roofs. Summer heat demanded careful management of water supplies. These conditions made frontier service difficult, but also created a shared experience among the soldiers stationed there. The arrangement of garrisons and watchtowers formed a continuous defensive chain along the wall. Each tower served as a point of observation. Each garrison provided manpower to respond to signals. Together, they created a frontier system capable of regulating movement, detecting threats, and supporting administrative control. The wall itself acted as a guide for this system, marking routes and shaping how soldiers positioned themselves across the landscape. As time passed, later dynasties inherited and expanded these installations. The Han dynasty strengthened many garrisons built during the Qin period and added new ones as the frontier stretched westward. The Ming dynasty, centuries later, introduced larger stone and brick fortresses along the wall. Yet the basic idea remained the same. Use a network of observation points and military stations to maintain order across a vast border. The presence of watchtowers and garrisons made the wall more than a physical barrier. It became a structured region where military, administrative, and civilian life intersected. This combination of architecture, organization, and communication shaped the frontier for centuries, supporting both defense and the day-to-day realities of life along the northern edge of the empire. The Great Wall extended across a vast and varied landscape. This meant that no single construction method or material could be used everywhere. Builders had to adapt to the local environment, selecting materials based on what the region offered and on how those materials performed in specific climates. As a result, the wall took on different forms in different areas. Understanding this variation helps explain why certain sections survived better than others, why later dynasties rebuilt some parts entirely, and how geography shaped the appearance of the wall throughout its long history. In the eastern regions of northern China, rainfall was relatively higher, and forests were more common. These conditions created challenges for rammed earth construction. Frequent rain could weaken earth walls, softening the outer layers and causing erosion over time. To counter these issues, builders often reinforced sections with stone bases or layers of gravel. In some areas, they incorporated wooden supports to stabilize the earth. While rammed earth was still used, it required more maintenance in wetter climates. As dynasties gained more resources, especially during the Ming period, brick became a preferred material in the east. Brick walls resisted rain and temperature changes better than earth alone. They also allowed builders to create stronger defensive structures, such as crenellations, watch platforms, and stairways. Brick production required kilns and organized labor, but the eastern regions had access to both fuel and clay suitable for firing. For this reason, the most famous and best preserved sections of the Great Wall near Beijing are built primarily of brick and stone rather than earth. Moving westward, the landscape changed dramatically. Forests became less common, and rainfall decreased. Large open plains and semi-arid zones stretched across the northern frontier. In these regions, rammed earth was not only practical but highly effective. The dry climate helped preserve compacted soil walls for long periods, sometimes centuries. Builders used local earth mixed with small stones or sand, depending on the composition of the ground. Because these materials were readily available, construction moved more quickly, allowing long stretches to be built with relatively simple tools. Further west, near the edges of the Gobi Desert, conditions became even more extreme. Vegetation was sparse, and rainfall was minimal. Here, builders relied almost entirely on rammed earth, gravel layers, and occasional reed reinforcements. In some areas, walls were constructed using alternating layers of soil and straw, which helped strengthen the structure and reduce cracking. Archaeological excavations reveal these layers as clear, horizontal lines still visible after 2,000 years. The dry climate preserved them better than almost any other part of the wall. In mountainous regions, stone became the dominant material. Mountains offered natural defenses, and builders used the terrain to their advantage. Instead of constructing tall, wide walls, they often built shorter stone structures along ridgelines or carved paths into the rock. Stones of different sizes were fitted together with packed earth as mortar. These walls blended into the mountain slopes, creating a defensive line that was difficult to scale. Stone construction required less maintenance in these areas because the material resisted erosion and temperature shifts better than earth. The choice of material also affected the shape and thickness of the wall. Rammed earth walls were usually wider at the base and tapered slightly as they rose. This design increased stability, especially in areas where strong winds or dry conditions could wear away the surface. Stone walls could be built narrower because the weight of the stones provided natural stability. Brick walls allowed for even more flexibility. They could include stairways, platforms, drainage channels, and carefully shaped battlements. Climate influenced nearly every construction decision. In regions with high winds, builders sometimes added windbreaks or built thicker outer layers to reduce erosion. In areas with freezing winters, materials had to withstand repeated cycles of freezing and thawing. Rammed earth could crack under these conditions, so stone or brick was preferred where temperatures fluctuated sharply. In desert zones, walls faced sandstorms that could wear down surface layers. To counter this, builders sometimes added gravel layers or reinforced the surface with additional compacted soil. Local resources shaped construction as much as climate did. Regions with quarries naturally produced more stone walls. Regions with clay-rich soil and fuel sources like wood or coal could support brick production. Where these materials were unavailable, builders relied entirely on earth. This practical approach meant that the Great Wall's appearance differed widely depending on where travelers encountered it. A section in the east might appear as tall brick battlements, while a stretch in the west could look like a long mound of compacted soil blending into the desert landscape. Historical records show that officials planned material use carefully. Before construction began, surveys were conducted to determine which materials were present and how much labor would be needed to gather them. If stone was available nearby, it was used. If not, earth became the default choice. This efficiency helped dynasties manage large-scale projects across distant regions without imposing unrealistic demands on local populations. Material variation also influenced how fast construction could progress. Rammed earth allowed rapid building over long distances, making it ideal for emergency repairs or fast expansion during periods of conflict. Stone or brick, by contrast, required more time and specialized labor. As a result, dynasties often used different materials for different purposes. Rammed earth for large, continuous stretches and brick or stone for key defensive points such as gates, fortresses, and high-traffic paths. Archaeological evidence highlights these differences. In the Gansu region, sections of the Han Wall show crisp layers of compacted earth that have remained intact despite centuries of exposure. In the mountains of northern Hubei, stone walls trace narrow ridgelines, still solid and sharply defined. Near Beijing, the brick walls of the Ming dynasty rise with uniform battlements and well-preserved walls. These contrasting appearances reflect not only the choices of different dynasties, but also the environmental realities of each region. Over centuries, material variation contributed to the wall's complexity. Travelers moving along the frontier would have seen the structure change shape and texture as the land itself changed. In some places, the wall appeared as a low earthwork, barely rising from the ground. In others, it became a striking stone barrier. These differences show how flexible and adaptive the construction process had to be in order to function across such a vast territory. As later dynasties inherited the wall, they built upon the existing materials. Where earth walls remained strong, they were repaired and extended. Where erosion had weakened earlier structures, new materials were introduced. Brick and stone eventually became symbols of the wall's iconic appearance. But these elements represented only one chapter in a much longer history shaped by environmental diversity. The frontier continued to evolve as each dynasty built, rebuilt, and adapted the wall to suit new conditions. Material choices remained closely tied to geography, ensuring that the structure reflected the landscape it crossed and the needs of the people who depended on it for defense and administration. The Great Wall stretched across environments that differed sharply in climate, terrain, and natural resources. These differences shaped every stage of construction and maintenance. Environmental conditions dictated when work could be done, how materials behaved, and how long structures could endure. Understanding these constraints helps explain why the wall took so many different forms and why certain sections required constant repair while others survived largely unchanged for centuries. Climate was one of the most important factors affecting construction. Northern China experiences wide temperature variations. Summers can be intensely hot, especially in the plains and desert margins, while winters can be extremely cold, particularly in high altitude and inland regions. These seasonal extremes influenced work schedules. Labor is often built during late spring, summer, and early autumn, when the soil was dry enough to compact and roads were easier to travel. In winter, frozen ground made digging difficult, and strong winds or heavy snow halted construction entirely. These conditions slowed the pace of work and required careful planning by officials. Rainfall patterns also shaped construction. In the eastern and central regions, where rainfall was higher, rammed earth walls faced challenges from erosion. Rainwater softened the outer layers of earth walls, gradually wearing them down. Builders tried to reduce this effect by adding gravel layers, reinforcing surfaces, or creating drainage channels. Even with these efforts, sections in wetter climates often needed more frequent repair. In contrast, the arid regions of the northwest preserved rammed earth walls exceptionally well. Dry air and limited rainfall prevented water damage, allowing many ancient layers to remain clearly visible today. Wind was another significant environmental constraint. Along the desert edges, strong winds carried sand that could accumulate against walls or wear away surface layers over time. Workers had to choose construction sites carefully, avoiding areas where shifting sand could destabilize foundations. In some regions, builders raised the base of the wall higher to prevent sand accumulation from burying lower sections. Watchtowers in windy zones sometimes included windbreak structures or thicker walls to resist prolonged exposure. The quality of soil varied across the frontier, influencing construction methods. In some places, the soil contained high levels of clay, which compacted well and produced strong rammed earth layers. In other regions, sandy soil required mixing with gravel or small stones to improve stability. Builders developed a practical understanding of local soil types, adjusting techniques accordingly. These decisions affected the durability of each section, leading to variations in how well different parts of the wall survived the centuries. Water availability shaped every stage of construction. Workers needed water not only for drinking and cooking, but also for preparing soil mixtures and maintaining livestock. Some stretches of the frontier had rivers or springs nearby, making it easier to establish construction camps, but many areas lacked reliable water sources. In these places, officials arranged for water to be transported from distant wells or seasonal streams. Cisterns were dug to collect rainwater, and some forts included stone-lined wells that reached deep into the ground. The difficulty of accessing water limited how fast construction could proceed and how many workers could be supported in remote segments. Terrain created additional challenges. Mountainous areas required builders to carve paths, meant rock, create stable foundations on steep slopes, and move materials along narrow ridges. These locations offered natural defensive advantages, but required significant labor. Earth had to be carried uphill or sourced from nearby valleys. Stone, while abundant in mountains, needed to be shaped and fitted carefully to form stable structures. Weathering in these regions came primarily from temperature changes and frost, which could crack stones or weaken mortar over time. In contrast, plains and open grasslands offered fewer obstacles to movement. Construction teams could transport tools and supplies more easily, and the land allowed long, continuous stretches of rammed earth walls. However, these flat regions were also more exposed to wind and lacked natural barriers. The wall needed to be thicker and taller in such areas to compensate for the lack of terrain-based defense. In some plains regions, the wall served more as a guide for patrol routes than as a physical barrier that could stop large groups on its own. Environmental constraints also influenced how long the wall could be maintained. Some regions required constant repair. Erosion from rain, flooding from seasonal rivers, and vegetation growth gradually weakened the structure. In wetter climates, roots from plants inserted themselves into cracks, further damaging walls. Soldiers and local households were assigned maintenance duties in these regions, performing seasonal repairs to preserve the integrity of the frontier. In drier regions, environmental damage accumulated much more slowly. Sections in the northwest, especially those built during the Han dynasty, remain remarkably well preserved because of the lack of moisture. Their compacted layers of rammed earth are still visible, showing the horizontal lines created by ancient construction teams. Sandstorms did cause wear, but the dry climate largely protected these walls from the erosion seen in other regions. Flooding posed unique challenges. In river valleys, seasonal floods could destroy entire wall sections if they were built too close to the riverbank. Builders learned to position walls on higher ground or reinforce foundations with stone. Some sections included drainage, ditches, or channels designed to redirect water away from the wall. These practical adaptations reduced the risk of collapse, but required additional labor and planning. Environmental constraints also influenced military operations along the frontier. In harsh winter conditions, garrisons had to prepare extra fuel, food, and clothing. Supply lines slowed in deep snow or during sandstorms. Watchtower visibility decreased during heavy weather, affecting communication. These environmental realities shaped the daily routines of soldiers and determined how quickly reinforcements could respond to signals. Despite these challenges, dynasties consistently expanded and maintained the wall across this diverse landscape. They adapted construction methods to suit local conditions, introduced reinforcements where needed, and developed logistical strategies to overcome natural obstacles. Environmental constraints did not stop wall building. Instead, they shaped the engineering solutions that defined each section. As each dynasty built upon previous structures, the wall became a physical record of decisions shaped by climate, terrain, and available resources. These variations continued to influence construction in later periods, guiding where walls were rebuilt, strengthened, or altered to meet new demands. The frontier remained a place where natural conditions shaped human planning, and the wall evolved in response to those conditions across centuries. Building the Great Wall was only the beginning. Once constructed, the wall required constant maintenance to remain effective. Weather, erosion, and daily use all affected its condition. For this reason, every dynasty that relied on the wall also developed systems for its repair. These systems varied across time and region, reflecting differences in climate, materials, and administrative organization. Maintenance became a regular part of frontier life, shaped by the rhythm of the seasons and the practical needs of those who lived along the wall. Rammed earth walls required particular attention. While extremely durable in dry climates, they were vulnerable to erosion from rain, wind, and temperature changes. Over time, surface layers loosened, forming cracks or crumbling sections. To preserve the structure, workers applied fresh layers of earth, compacting them in the same way the original walls were built. This refacing process restored the surface and protected the deeper layers from further erosion. In areas with higher rainfall, these repairs were needed more frequently, sometimes several times within a decade. Stone and brick sections required different treatment. Stone walls were strong, but could crack or shift due to freeze-thaw cycles in winter. Over time, gaps appeared between stones, requiring workers to reset them or add fresh mortars. Brick walls, especially those built during the Ming dynasty, were more resistant to erosion but still needed repairs where bricks loosened or where drainage systems became clogged. Maintaining these sections involved replacing individual bricks, reinforcing corners, and clearing channels that carried rainwater away from the wall. The responsibility for maintenance was shared between soldiers, local residents, and specialized labor teams. Garrison troops often performed routine repairs as part of their duties. They checked for damage after storms, reinforced weak points, and cleared debris from watchtower entrances or stairways. Soldiers also maintained the paths along the top of the wall, which were used for patrols and movement between towers. Keeping these routes clear ensured that communication and military operations could continue smoothly. In some regions, households living near the frontier were assigned maintenance obligations. These assignments were part of a larger tax and labor system. Local families were required to provide workers for annual repair projects, especially in areas where the wall protected their agricultural lands. This shared responsibility helped spread the workload and ensured that maintenance did not depend solely on garrisons stationed along the wall. These local contributions were usually organized by village leaders or regional officials who coordinated schedules and tasks. Large-scale repairs required more planning. Officials inspected wall sections at regular intervals, often once or twice a year. They recorded the condition of each segment, noting which areas needed reinforcement or replacement. When damage was severe, such as after flooding, landslides, or long periods of neglect, officials mobilized larger labor teams to conduct extensive restoration. These teams brought tools, materials, and supplies, sometimes traveling long distances to reach damaged sections. Seasonal timing was crucial. Most repairs occurred in spring and autumn. In spring, workers addressed damage caused by winter weather. In autumn, they prepared the wall for the coming cold season. Summer repairs were less common, particularly in desert regions, where extreme heat made the work more difficult. Winter maintenance was limited to emergency situations because frozen soil was nearly impossible to compact, and travel conditions often became unsafe. Drainage systems played an important role in maintenance. Many wall sections included ditches or channels that directed rainwater away from the base. These channels prevented water from pooling and weakening foundations. Soldiers and villagers cleaned these systems regularly, removing debris, sand, or vegetation. In brick and stone sections, builders created small openings that allowed water to pass through the wall instead of accumulating behind it. Keeping these openings clear helped preserve the structure over time. Vegetation management was another part of maintenance. Plants growing on or near the wall could cause damage by breaking apart the soil or shifting stones. Workers cut back grasses, shrubs, and tree roots, ensuring that growth did not interfere with the structure. In some regions, particularly where soil was loose, vegetation was allowed to remain in controlled areas because plant roots helped stabilize the surface. These decisions varied according to local conditions and reflected practical knowledge accumulated over generations. Watchtower maintenance required additional effort. Towers exposed to constant wind and weather developed cracks or weakened foundations. Workers reinforced these areas with fresh layers of rammed earth or replaced stones where necessary. Interior wooden structures, such as stairs or platforms, needed regular repair due to wear and weathering. Soldiers stationed at the towers were responsible for monitoring these conditions and reporting any problems to their superiors. Archaeological evidence provides clear signs of maintenance. Some wall sections show layers of repair added on top of earlier construction. These layers differ slightly in color or texture, revealing how the wall evolved over time. In certain places, workers used materials that were different from those used originally, reflecting changes in available resources or improvements in construction techniques. For example, red layers added to earlier earth walls during the Han dynasty improved stability in regions where soil tended to crack. Maintenance also played a role in military readiness. A well-maintained wall allowed soldiers to move quickly along patrol routes, send signals efficiently, and respond to any activity along the frontier. Damaged walls could slow movement or block communication. For this reason, commanders emphasized regular inspections and ensured that garrisons allocated time for repair work. Maintaining the wall became part of the routine that shaped life along the frontier. Frontier communities often interacted with maintenance teams. When larger-scale repairs took place, temporary camps formed near damaged sections. Workers brought livestock, tools, and food supplies, creating small, active settlements that lasted until the project was complete. Local residents sometimes supported these teams by selling goods or providing additional labor. These interactions contributed to the social landscape of the frontier, creating temporary but recurring points of contact between military and civilian populations. Over time, maintenance practices developed into a system that allowed the wall to endure through centuries of environmental and political change. Each dynasty contributed its own methods, adjusting techniques to reflect new materials, new threats, and new administrative structures. The work never truly ended. As long as the wall remained part of the frontier, it required attention, effort, and coordination. The continuous process of maintaining and repairing the Great Wall ensured that it remained functional across different regions and historical periods. This ongoing effort shaped the appearance of the wall as much as the original construction methods did. As later dynasties expanded their influence and redirected the wall's path, they inherited not only the structure itself, but also the responsibility to keep it standing. These practices formed a crucial link between generations of builders, soldiers, and communities living along the northern border. When the Ming dynasty came to power in 1368, China faced a frontier very different from the one earlier dynasties had known. The northern steppe remained home to powerful mobile groups, and throughout the early Ming period, these groups launched raids into Chinese territory. To respond to these pressures, the Ming government initiated one of the most extensive wall-building programs in Chinese history. This effort transformed many parts of the Great Wall, replacing earlier rammed-earth structures with stone and brick and introducing new defensive features that reflected changing military needs. The early Ming rulers focused on consolidating their control over the central and eastern regions of the empire. Once stability returned, attention shifted to the northern frontier. Reports from military commanders described vulnerabilities along the border, especially in plains regions where older rammed earth walls had deteriorated. Large gaps allowed mounted groups to move quickly into agricultural zones. The Ming government saw the need not only to repair existing walls but to rebuild them with stronger materials capable of resisting both weather and attack. Brick and stone became the primary materials for the Ming reconstruction. Unlike earlier periods, the Ming dynasty had access to organized brickmaking operations, fuel supplies, and skilled labor. Kilns were built near major construction sites, producing bricks in vast quantities. These bricks were uniform in shape and size, allowing builders to create more consistent and durable structures. Stone was used for foundations, stairways, and steep mountain sections. The combination of stone and brick produced walls that could withstand erosion, support heavy watchtowers, and endure more intense military pressure. The process of reconstruction required detailed planning. Officials surveyed earlier walls to determine which sections could be repaired and which needed complete rebuilding. In many areas, the Ming engineers built a new wall parallel to or directly on top of earlier structures. They widened the base, raised the height, and strengthened the surface. where earlier walls followed ridges. The Ming continued this practice but added parapets, battlements, and walkways that allowed soldiers to patrol more effectively. Labor for the reconstruction came from several sources, including soldiers, conscripted workers, and hired artisans. The Ming dynasty maintained large standing armies, and soldiers were regularly assigned to construction duties. Skilled masons and bricklayers played an important role in shaping stone blocks and laying brick surfaces. Unlike earlier Ramdarth projects, brick construction required a higher degree of technical skill. Supervision was strict, and officials monitored progress to ensure that walls met structural standards. The scale of the Ming program expanded beyond simple reconstruction. The government built large fortresses at strategic points along the frontier. These fortresses housed garrisons, stored supplies, and functioned as command centers. The most notable example is the Jiazhou Pass fortress in the far west, constructed of rammed earth, brick, and stone. Other major fortresses, such as Zhuyang Pass and Shanhai Pass, guarded key routes near the capital. These structures included thick outer walls, defensive gates, and internal courtyards where soldiers trained and officials administered the region. Watchtowers also became more substantial during the Ming period. Brick and stone allowed for taller, more stable towers with multiple levels. Openings were placed in strategic directions to allow soldiers to observe distant movement. In some regions, towers doubled as living quarters or storage areas. Their increased height and durability improved communication and visibility across the frontier. The Ming dynasty placed great importance on integrating wall defenses with military administration. The frontier was divided into commands, each responsible for a specific region of the wall. Commanders oversaw garrisons, patrol routes, and construction work. Records showed that the Ming government assigned specific units to repair designated wall segments, ensuring that maintenance continued even during periods of conflict. The organization of these units reflected the scale of the frontier and the need for continuous monitoring. Environmental factors shaped the reconstruction process. In mountainous areas, builders used stone extensively because it resisted erosion and blended well with the terrain. In desert regions, where stone was scarce, brick remained the primary material. When neither stone nor sufficient clay for bricks was readily available, the Ming continued to use rammed earth, though often reinforced with brick or stone surfaces. These adaptive practices allowed the dynasty to rebuild the wall across diverse environments while maintaining structural strength. The increased durability of Ming construction meant that many of the most recognizable sections of the Great Wall today reflect Ming engineering. Brick surfaces, crenellated battlements, stone foundations, and paved walkways come from this period. These features were not simply decorative. They served practical military purposes. Battlements allowed soldiers to take defensive positions. Drainage holes prevented water accumulation. Stairways provided access to elevated points. Each component reflected careful attention to both defense and long-term maintenance. Trade and transportation also influenced Ming reconstruction. The expanding economy required secure routes between regions, and the wall helped regulate movement. Fortified gates controlled entry and exit points, allowing officials to monitor merchants, travelers, and goods. Some passes became hubs of activity where markets formed near the frontier. These economic functions complemented the wall's military purpose and helped integrate frontier regions more closely with the interior. Archaeological evidence highlights the precision of Ming construction. Bricks from this period often include stamps that record the location of the kill, the supervisor in charge, or the unit responsible for production. These stamps show how tightly controlled the supply chain was during reconstruction. Stone blocks from mountain sections reveal tool marks from masons, indicating careful shaping and placement. Excavated watchtowers demonstrate multiple floors supported by wooden beams, with space allocated for storage and observation. Maintenance during the Ming dynasty followed patterns established earlier but with increased emphasis on structural integrity. Brick surfaces required inspection to identify loose or cracked bricks. Weeds and roots were removed to prevent damage. Drainage systems were checked regularly, especially after heavy rain. Soldiers stationed along the wall performed much of this work, supported by local labor teams when large repairs were needed. Because Ming walls had more complex features than earlier earth walls, maintenance required a broader range of skills. The Ming reconstruction program reshaped the frontier. It created a series of strong defensive lines, interconnected garrisons, and regional command centers. These improvements allowed the Ming to respond more effectively to threats and to stabilize the northern border for long periods. While the wall did not prevent all incursions, it provided a structured defense system that supported military, administrative, and economic life along the frontier. As later centuries unfolded, the wall continued to evolve. The foundations laid during the Ming dynasty literally and structurally formed the basis for the wall as it is known today. The brick battlements, stone fortresses, and well-preserved towers that define the modern image of the Great Wall reflect this period of intense reconstruction and renewed focus on frontier defense. The Ming Dynasty-esque reconstruction of the Great Wall introduced engineering features that made the structure far more durable and functional than earlier versions. These features reflected new military needs, improved construction methods, and a deeper understanding of how to design defenses that could withstand both environmental pressures and human threats. Many of these elements remain visible today, shaping the modern image of the Great Wall. One of the most notable features of Ming construction was the use of a stone foundation topped with brick or stone facing. Earlier dynasties relied primarily on rammed earth, which performed well in dry regions but eroded more quickly in areas exposed to rain, frost, or steep terrain. The Ming builders resolved this problem by creating a layered structure. Large stone blocks formed the base, ensuring stability on uneven or rocky ground. On top of this foundation, bricks or smaller stones were laid in regular courses, creating a firm outer surface that protected the interior from erosion. The internal core of many Ming wall sections remained rammed earth. This combination stone brick and compacted soil balanced strength with efficient use of materials. Brick and stone provided durability where it mattered most, while the earth core reduced the need to transport large quantities of heavy materials. This hybrid structure allowed the Ming dynasty to construct long stretches of wall that were both sturdy and economical. Drainage systems represented another engineering advance. Rainwater could weaken the wall if it collected at the base or seeped into cracks. To prevent this, Ming builders incorporated drainage openings, known as water outlets, along the sides of the wall. These openings allowed water to escape rather than accumulate. In addition, the surface of the wall was slightly sloped to direct water away from the walkway. These features helped reduce erosion and contributed to the long-term stability of the structure. The top of the Ming wall included a walkway or patrol road. This flat surface allowed soldiers to move quickly between watchtowers and defensive positions. In some sections, the walkway was paved with bricks or stone slabs, creating a solid path for patrols. The width of the walkway varied, but it was typically wide enough for several soldiers to walk side by side or for carts to transport supplies. This feature made the wall not only a barrier, but also a transportation route that supported communication and logistics along the frontier. Battlements were another defining characteristic of Ming engineering. The top of the wall included parapets with crenellations alternating high and low sections. The high sections protected soldiers from enemy fire, while the low sections provided openings for returning fire. These battlements gave defenders a secure position from which to observe and respond to threats. Their standardized design across many parts of the wall reflected a coordinated military strategy. Watchtowers also evolved during the Ming period. Earlier towers were often simple, single-level structures built primarily for observation. Ming towers, by contrast, were larger and more complex. Many included multiple floors supported by wooden beams. The lower levels served as storage areas for weapons, food, and signal materials such as firewood or straw. Upper levels provided space for archers or lookouts. Openings were placed strategically to allow views over the surrounding terrain. The shape of the towers varied. Some were square, others rectangular, and a few were round, but all shared the goal of improving surveillance and communication. Signal systems were integrated more thoroughly into the architecture of the wall. Beacon towers located at intervals along the frontier played a key role in transmitting messages. These towers featured a platform where smoke or fire signals could be sent. The visibility of these signals depended on tower height and distance, so Ming planners paid careful attention to tower placement. The combination of watchtowers and beacon towers created a network capable of transmitting information quickly across long distances. Fortified gates represented another important engineering feature. Gates controlled access between regions and needed to withstand potential attacks. Ming gates often included multiple layers of defense. Large wooden doors were reinforced with iron or metal studs. Behind the doors, interior courtyards allowed defenders to control movement and respond to threats. Gatehouses, which extended above the passageway, provided elevated positions for soldiers. Some gates also included fortifications, vertically moving barriers that could be lowered quickly in emergencies. Guardhouses and barracks were sometimes built directly into the wall. These structures allowed soldiers to remain near strategic points without relying solely on distant garrisons. In mountainous regions, small platforms were carved into the rock to support these buildings. In flatter areas, guardhouses were constructed from brick and offered shelter from weather. Their placement helped ensure that every part of the wall could be monitored and defended as needed. Another engineering consideration was the alignment of the wall. Ming planners often followed ridgelines and natural terrain features, just as earlier builders had done. However, they refined this approach by selecting positions that maximized visibility and created multiple lines of defense. In some regions, Ming builders constructed parallel walls or subsidiary barriers that protected vulnerable passes or river crossings. These secondary defenses strengthened the overall system and made it more difficult for enemy forces to penetrate the frontier. The durability of Ming engineering is evident in the remains that survive today. Brick battlements maintain their shape, stone foundations remain firmly in place, and watchtowers still rise above the landscape in many regions. The precision of bricklaying and the strength of stone construction helped these sections endure centuries of weather and human activity. Archaeological examinations show careful craftsmanship, with bricks laid in interlocking patterns and stones cut to fit tightly together. Ming engineering also influenced military operations. The improved walkway allowed faster movement of troops along the wall. The standardized battlements helped create consistent defensive positions. The integrated network of towers enabled rapid communication. All these features supported the Ming strategy of maintaining a strong, responsive frontier capable of addressing threats as they arose. In addition to military purposes, some engineering features supported civilian activities. Fortified passages became commercial centers where merchants, travelers, and local residents exchanged goods. The presence of a reliable walkway made these passes accessible, while the thickness of the walls provided security for markets and administrative offices. These dual uses show how Ming engineering shaped both defense and daily life along the frontier. The Ming reconstruction program brought together centuries of building experience and adapted it to new conditions. The engineering features added during this period did not replace earlier methods entirely, but they transformed the wall into a stronger, more capable defensive system. These features helped define the wall as iconic appearance and contributed to its longevity as a historical structure. As time moved forward, the Ming Wall remained a central element of frontier strategy, influencing how later generations understood and interacted with the northern border. The engineering choices of this period became a lasting part of the wall's history, shaping its form and function in ways that can still be seen today. The Great Wall functioned not only as a physical barrier, but also as part of a broad administrative system that governed movement, defense, and daily life along the northern frontier. This administrative structure formed the backbone of wall operations across multiple dynasties. Whether during the Han Tang or Ming periods, the effectiveness of the wall depended on clear lines of authority, organized military units, and regular communication between officials responsible for different segments of the frontier. Administration along the wall began with geographic divisions. The frontier was divided into regions, each overseen by military commanders who reported directly to higher authorities. These commanders managed local garrisons, coordinated patrols, and supervised wall maintenance. Each region included several forts and watchtowers, linked by paths or roads. By dividing the frontier into manageable sections, dynasties ensured that no commander was responsible for more territory than he could effectively monitor. Garrisons served as administrative hubs for their assigned territory. Commanders stationed at these posts kept written records of personnel, supplies, and daily activities. They documented how many soldiers were on duty, which parts of the wall had been inspected, and when repairs were needed. These records allowed officials at higher levels to understand the condition of the frontier and to plan accordingly. The presence of written documentation reflected a long tradition of bureaucratic organization that extended back to earlier dynasties. At the local level, officers supervised small groups of soldiers responsible for specific wall segments. These officers assigned daily duties, ensured that patrols followed their schedules, and verified that watchtower signals were properly maintained. Their role connected the strategic decisions made at regional headquarters with the practical tasks performed by soldiers on the ground. This layered command structure helped maintain stability across long and often isolated areas of the frontier. Communication formed a key part of the administrative system. Messages traveled between garrisons and regional headquarters through mounted couriers who followed established routes along the wall. These couriers carried written reports sealed with official markings to ensure that messages remained accurate and secure. In addition to written communication, signal towers provided immediate transmission of urgent information. When watchtowers detected movement or potential threats, they sent smoke or fire signals to nearby towers. These signals allowed commanders to react quickly and direct troops where they were needed. Administrative responsibilities extended beyond military activities. Officials monitored trade, registered travelers, and enforced frontier laws. Gates along the wall acted as checkpoints where merchants presented documentation, paid customs duties, and received permission to proceed. Garrison officials kept records of goods moving across the frontier, providing valuable information for taxation and economic planning. In this way, the wall served as both a defensive barrier and a regulated corridor for movement and exchange. Local civilian communities also fell under the administrative structure of wall defense. Villages near the frontier often relied on protection provided by garrisons. In return, residents contributed labor for wall maintenance or supplied goods, such as grain, firewood, or livestock. These contributions formed part of broader tax systems that linked civilian populations with military operations. Administrative officials ensured that contributions were recorded accurately and distributed where needed. During the Ming dynasty, the administrative system became even more structured. The frontier was divided into 9 military regions known as defense commands, each responsible for a major stretch of the wall. These commands coordinated thousands of soldiers and managed extensive networks of forts, storage facilities, and patrol routes. Commanders held significant responsibility and were expected to maintain order, oversee repairs, and respond to threats. Reports from these commanders traveled to the central government, where senior officials assessed the security of the frontier and issued new directives when necessary. Logistics formed another important administrative function. Officials organized the transport of grain, tools, weapons, and clothing to garrisons along the wall. Supply routes stretched across mountains, plains, and deserts. Administrators used detailed records to calculate the needs of each region, ensuring that soldiers had sufficient provisions to function during all seasons. In some areas, military farms provided grain directly, reducing the need for long-distance transport. Officials monitored these farms closely, integrating them into the broader frontier system. The legal framework also played a role in wall administration. Frontier laws outlined penalties for crimes such as smuggling, unauthorized border crossing, and negligence in the performance of military duties. Officials enforced these regulations to maintain stability and prevent corruption. Soldiers were required to follow strict protocols during patrols, inspections, and communication. Commanders could be punished for failing to report important events or for neglecting maintenance. These regulations reinforced the seriousness of frontier management. Training and discipline formed part of administrative oversight. Soldiers stationed along the wall practiced archery, weapons handling, and defensive drills. Training schedules were recorded and reviewed by officers to ensure readiness. Watchtower crews practiced signal procedures to maintain accuracy in communication. Inspections determined whether soldiers understood their duties and whether equipment remained in proper condition. These practices kept garrisons prepared for sudden developments along the frontier. As the wall expanded and evolved, administrative structures had to adapt. New passes, forts, and wall segments required updated patrol routes and communication plans. Commanders assessed terrain changes, weather patterns, and shifting settlement areas to adjust strategies. When populations moved or trade patterns changed, administrative officials modified gate protocols or reorganized supply routes. This adaptability allowed the wall to function across different historical periods and environmental conditions. Archaeological findings highlight the administrative complexity of the frontier. Excavations at garrisons reveal storage rooms filled with pottery jars, indicating organized food distribution. Wooden slips and bamboo documents found near wall sites record soldiers' names, supplies issued, and maintenance tasks completed. These records provide insight into the daily operations of wall administration and confirm the role of bureaucracy in maintaining the frontier. The administrative structure also influenced cultural and social life along the border. Garrisons often became centers of activity, where soldiers, merchants, travelers, and villagers interacted. Markets formed near major passes, offering goods from different regions. The presence of officials ensured that trade remained regulated and that taxes were collected. Over time, these areas developed into small but vibrant communities, shaped by the rhythms of frontier administration. Through these systems of command, communication, supply, and law, the wall became more than a physical structure. It functioned as a managed frontier zone supported by layers of oversight and coordinated effort. Administration gave the wall its operational strength, enabling it to fulfill its purpose across centuries of change and varied historical contexts. Across its long history, the Great Wall served many purposes: a defensive barrier, an administrative boundary, a communication network, and a symbol of organized state power. Because it developed over centuries, its long-term impact cannot be reduced to a single function. Instead, the wall shaped military strategy, regional settlement, economic patterns, and political identity across northern China. The accumulated contributions of many dynasties, Qin, Han, Tang, Ming, and others produced a frontier system that influenced China's development far beyond immediate military needs. One of the most significant impacts of the wall was the stabilization of the northern frontier. The terrain along the border was vast and diverse, stretching across deserts, mountains, and plains. Maintaining order in these regions required more than military strength. The wall provided a framework for organizing patrols, positioning garrisons, and regulating movement. Even when it did not stop incursions entirely, the wall slowed them, bought time for defenders to respond, and marked areas where surveillance was strongest. This predictable structure helped dynasties manage regions that would otherwise have been difficult to control. Settlement patterns along the northern border changed significantly because of the wall. As garrisons grew into long-term military posts, families moved into nearby areas, building villages and small towns. Over time, these settlements supported agriculture, trade, and craft production, helping to stabilize frontier life. The presence of soldiers created demand for food, tools, and clothing, which encouraged local communities to expand their production. Frontier markets appeared near major passes, and trade networks developed between rural areas and administrative centers. These developments anchored population growth in places that had previously been sparsely inhabited. The wall also influenced transportation and communication. Patrol routes, relay stations, and roads built to support wall maintenance became permanent parts of the landscape. In many regions, these routes connected distant areas more efficiently than earlier paths had done. During the Han Dynasty, the relay system supported the transmission of government messages, linking remote garrisons with central authorities. Later, as the Silk Road expanded, some of these same routes carried merchants and goods across the frontier. The wall indirectly supported commerce by protecting travel corridors and defining zones where officials could regulate movement. Economically, the wall required substantial resources to build and maintain. Dynasties mobilized labor, material supplies, and administrative oversight at a scale rarely seen in other regions of the ancient world. These efforts shaped local economies by directing production towards state projects. Brick kilns, stone quarries, and carpentry workshops developed near major construction zones. Communities provided grain, livestock, and textiles to support workers and soldiers. This concentration of resources reinforced the role of the frontier in the broader economic landscape. The wall also influenced diplomatic relationships. By marking a clear boundary, it defined zones of interaction between the Chinese dynasties and northern steppe groups. Negotiations, alliances, and conflicts often centered around frontier passes and garrisons. Tribute exchanges, trade agreements, and joint arrangements for movement took place at designated points. These interactions shaped political communication and created enduring patterns of exchange between agrarian and nomadic cultures. Culturally, the wall became part of the identity of the dynasties that built and maintained it. Through official records, military writings, and administrative documents, the wall appeared as a defining feature of the northern world. It represented organization, perseverance, and the ability of a central government to coordinate large-scale projects. Over time, the wall came to symbolize the boundary between agricultural societies and the open steppe. Even though this boundary shifted many times throughout history, this symbolic meaning grew stronger as later generations inherited the structure and its legacy. In military history, the wall demonstrated that defense relied not only on physical barriers, but also on coordinated systems. Watchtowers, garrisons, patrol routes, and signal networks worked together to monitor movement and respond to developments. The Ming dynasty's use of brick battlements, fortified positions, and multi-layered defenses reflected a sophisticated understanding of how architecture supported military strategy. The wall's design influenced later fortification systems in other parts of East Asia, showing how its principles extended beyond the regions it directly protected. The environmental impact of the wall also lasted for centuries. Construction required digging pits, gathering timber, transporting stone, and clearing land for camps and roads. These activities altered local ecosystems, especially in areas where large populations of workers lived temporarily. The spread of settlements along the frontier introduced agriculture and livestock to new regions, reshaping local vegetation and soil patterns. While these changes varied across different dynasties and landscapes, they formed part of the long-term imprint the wall left on northern China. Regions once defined by scattered settlements became connected by garrisons, administrative centers, and trade routes. This integration contributed to the expansion of Chinese influence into areas that had previously been culturally and economically independent. As frontier life stabilized, families remained in these regions, establishing long-term communities that linked the northern border more closely to the interior. The long-term impact of the Great Wall also appears in how later dynasties understood territorial security. By relying on a combination of wall defenses, garrisons, and administrative oversight, dynasties developed systems for managing borderlands that continued into modern times. Even after the military significance of the wall changed, the administrative divisions and road networks, established during earlier periods, remained part of regional organization. Archaeological work along different sections of the wall highlights its enduring presence. Rammed earth layers from the Han dynasty remain intact in dry regions. Brick walls from the Ming dynasty stand along mountain ridges. Watchtowers, forts, and beacon platforms survive in various states of preservation, offering insight into daily life along the frontier. These remains show how deeply the wall was woven into the landscape, shaping the physical environment as well as the historical record. The Great Wall, its long-term historical impact, lies not in a single achievement, but in centuries of adaptation. Each dynasty added new features, introduced new materials, and reorganized administrative systems to meet the needs of its time. The result was a structure that reflected the changing relationship between the Chinese dynasties and the northern world. Its influence can still be seen in the physical landscape, the patterns of settlement along the frontier, and the historical memory of China's northern border. As later periods moved beyond the need for large-scale frontier defenses, the wall remained as a reminder of the long history of interaction between settled agricultural regions and the steppe. Its presence continues to illustrate how geography, governance, and engineering combined to shape one of the most enduring structures in human history. Across many centuries, the Great Wall developed into a system that reflected the changing needs of the dynasties that built and maintained it. What began as separate defensive lines constructed by early states grew into a network that extended across mountains, plains, and deserts. Each dynasty added new elements. The Qin unified earlier walls, the Han extended the frontier toward key trade routes, and the Ming rebuilt major sections with brick and stone to meet new military conditions. These contributions formed a layered structure shaped by geography, climate, and administrative planning. The wall influenced life far beyond its immediates. Frontier garrisons connected remote regions to the central government through communication routes and supply networks. Agricultural colonies supported soldiers, while markets near passes linked merchants and travelers across different parts of the empire. These activities helped integrate northern borderlands into broader economic and social systems. Over time, Settlements grew around forts and watchtowers, forming communities shaped by the rhythm of frontier life. The engineering choices made along the wall reflected practical concerns. Rammed earth provided strength in dry climates, while brick and stone offered durability in regions exposed to rain or steep terrain. Watchtowers, fortresses, and fortified gates combined architecture with communication needs. Drainage systems, patrol walkways, and battlements demonstrated a detailed understanding of how to preserve the structure and maintain defensive readiness. Even after its military role diminished, the wall remained a physical record of decisions made by generations of builders, soldiers, and administrators. It marked the interactions between agricultural societies and the steppe world, shaping how dynasties understood security, governance, and regional organization. Today, the Great Wall stands as evidence of long-term adaptation and enduring structure, shaped by the landscapes it crossed and the people who depended on it.